You're in a relationship, but somehow you feel completely alone. Is it love or just one-sided effort? In today's episode of Ego Pedia, we'll uncover the signs of emotional neglect and ask the real question: is he just selfish?
Loneliness within a relationship is a deeply painful paradox. How can you feel isolated while lying beside someone every night? This article explores the emotional experience of feeling alone while partnered and raises a critical question: is it emotional distance or emotional selfishness? We dive into the psychology behind loneliness in relationships, explore the difference between selfish behavior and deeper relational disconnection, and offer tools for recognizing, understanding, and confronting the dynamic before it quietly destroys your emotional well-being. The silent crisis of emotional loneliness. Loneliness is often imagined as something that happens in solitude: empty apartments, solo dinners, quiet walks home. But perhaps the most excruciating form of loneliness is the kind that happens within a relationship, when you're physically close, yet emotionally worlds apart. When you're sharing a bed, but not your heart. When your partner is in the room, but it feels like no one is really with you. This is what we call emotional loneliness, and it's a silent crisis that affects more people than we talk about. Why silent? Because it often goes unnoticed, not just by outsiders, but by the person experiencing it. Especially in long-term or seemingly functional relationships, emotional loneliness can be mistaken for stress, burnout, or moodiness. People may say things like, "I don't know what's wrong. I just feel off. I can't complain. He's not a bad guy. Maybe I'm just being too sensitive." These phrases are quiet red flags. They signal that the person is suppressing the truth of their experience because what they're feeling is hard to name and even harder to justify. After all, how do you tell someone, "I feel invisible, even though I'm always in your line of sight"? "I feel uncared for, even though you pay the bills and come home every night"? Emotional loneliness is the experience of being in proximity to someone who no longer feels emotionally reachable. And it creates an ache that no amount of physical presence can heal. Why this kind of loneliness hurts more? What makes emotional loneliness particularly painful is the betrayal of expectation. We enter relationships with the hope of intimacy, connection, and mutual support. We expect to be known, not just tolerated. When those expectations go unmet over time, the gap between what we hoped for and what we're living with becomes a kind of emotional void. Worse still, we often gaslight ourselves into staying silent. Society tells us to be grateful, not needy, to focus on the big picture, to be understanding when our partner is tired, distracted, or emotionally avoidant. As a result, we shrink our needs. We stop expressing our hurt. We normalize a kind of emotional starvation. But here's the truth: if you feel emotionally alone, you are emotionally alone. And naming that experience is the first step toward reclaiming your emotional reality. It's not always obvious, even to you. Emotional loneliness doesn't always arrive with big fights or dramatic exits. It often appears in subtle symptoms. You stop sharing your deeper thoughts because you feel unheard. You long for comfort but hesitate to reach out. You feel more relaxed alone than you do with your partner. You fantasize about being understood, not by someone else, but just at all. These signs can be easy to dismiss because the relationship looks fine on the outside. You function. You co-parent. You go out to dinner. But emotionally, you're navigating your world alone, with someone right beside you. When loneliness turns into self-doubt. Perhaps the most damaging part of emotional loneliness is what it does to your sense of self. Over time, you may begin to question your own emotional intelligence. Am I too needy? Why can't I just be happy with what I have? Maybe I'm the one who's broken. This self-doubt becomes a second wound layered over the first. Not only are you emotionally alone, but now you also feel ashamed for needing more. But needing connection isn't a weakness. It's a human necessity. Why we must talk about it. Emotional loneliness isn't just a private ache, it's a public issue. It affects our mental health, our physical well-being, and our ability to love ourselves and others fully. It leads to depression, anxiety, numbness, and in some cases, staying in relationships that slowly dismantle our sense of worth. This is why it's critical to ask uncomfortable but necessary questions like, is this emotional distance temporary? Or is it a pattern? Is this just life being busy? Or is he emotionally unavailable or even selfish? Is there room in this relationship for me? Not just my role, but my emotional presence? These questions are not meant to condemn, but to awaken, to pull back the curtain on a kind of suffering that too many people quietly endure, and to remind you that your emotional experience is not only real, it is valid, and it matters. The experience of feeling alone, even when you're together. There is a certain kind of sadness that doesn't come from solitude, but from togetherness that feels hollow. It's the quiet, creeping loneliness that settles in not when you're alone in a room, but when you're sharing space with someone who no longer truly sees or hears you. This kind of emotional isolation isn't always dramatic. It often shows up in the tiny, everyday moments where connection should live, but doesn't. It's in the conversations that don't go deep. You talk, but it's all surface. Logistics.
Chores.
Work schedules. What to eat for dinner. There's no laughter that feels spontaneous, no checking in just to hear your thoughts, no moments of heartfelt curiosity about how you're really doing. You may ask a question like, "How was your day?" hoping it might lead to something, anything, but it rarely does. His answers are short, distracted, or deflected. And when you try to share more of yourself, you sense his eyes glaze over, his body shift, his attention drift away. Eventually, you stop trying. It's in the emotional disinterest. When you're emotionally connected to someone, their pain matters to you. Their joy excites you. Their struggles evoke your support. But when you're alone in a relationship, your emotions seem to land in a void. You might cry and he walks away. You might say, "I'm not okay," and he replies, "You'll be fine." You might express confusion, insecurity, or vulnerability and be met with indifference, discomfort, or defensiveness. It's not just that he doesn't know how to support you. It's that he doesn't try. That absence of engagement, effort, empathy hurts more than anger, because it tells you that your inner world is not just misunderstood, it's unimportant. It's in the affection that feels mechanical or conditional. Touch, once tender, now feels like routine or worse, obligation.
Kisses are quick.
Hugs are distracted. Sex, if it happens, feels disconnected or one-sided. There's little sense of emotional buildup, of mutual desire, of shared vulnerability. And when you ask for more connection, emotional or physical, you're made to feel guilty, clingy, or too much. You begin to question your own needs, shrink your desires, or overcompensate with more affection, hoping it will spark something back. But love doesn't grow from proving. It grows from presence. And when that's missing, affection begins to feel like performance, not intimacy. It's in the disparity between we and me. In emotionally connected relationships, there is a sense of we, a shared emotional language, a mutual rhythm, a space where both people feel seen, valued, and included in each other's inner lives. But when you feel alone in a relationship, it becomes clear that he's operating from me. His world seems separate from yours. His decisions, his emotions, his growth, he processes them alone. Or worse, he expects you to support his emotional journey while he remains absent from yours. You're in the same room, but living on different planets. The quiet grief of unacknowledged absence. Perhaps the hardest part of this kind of loneliness is that there's nothing tangible to point to. No betrayal. No explosion. No obvious crisis. Just a gradual fading. Of eye contact. Of laughter. Of effort. Of warmth. You start grieving not a person who has left, but a person who is still physically present yet emotionally absent. And because it's so subtle, it's hard to talk about. You may even hear yourself say, "I don't know what's wrong. We just feel off." But what you're really trying to say is, "I'm alone here, and I don't think he even notices." How this emotional isolation affects you. The impact of this experience isn't just sadness, it's self-erasure. You begin to silence your voice because it feels like no one's really listening. Minimize your emotions to avoid the sting of being dismissed. Question your reality, wondering if it's all in your head. Carry the emotional load alone, even though the relationship should be shared. Miss who you used to be before you began dimming yourself to survive the silence. And what's even more painful, you may still love him. You may still want the relationship to work. But love alone cannot carry the weight of disconnection. Togetherness without connection is not togetherness at all. Feeling emotionally alone in a relationship is not a weakness on your part. It's a signal. A signal that something essential is missing. That presence is not the same as partnership. That proximity is not the same as intimacy. And while it's tempting to keep hoping things will change on their own, the truth is this. Loneliness in a relationship doesn't go away by staying quiet. It goes away by getting honest. First with yourself, then with him. You are not asking for too much. You are asking for enough. Is it emotional neglect, or is it selfishness? When you feel alone in a relationship, one of the hardest questions to answer is, why? Is your partner overwhelmed? Is he emotionally unavailable due to stress, trauma, or his upbringing? Or, more painfully, is he just emotionally selfish? At first glance, emotional neglect and emotional selfishness might look the same. In both cases, you feel unseen, unheard, and unsupported. But the difference lies in intention, awareness, and response to your needs. Understanding this distinction is essential because how you interpret your partner's behavior will shape how long you stay, how much you tolerate, and what you expect going forward. Let's break it down with care. What is emotional neglect? Emotional neglect is the failure to meet your partner's emotional needs, but not necessarily out of malice or self-centeredness. Often, it's the result of a lack of emotional awareness, fear of intimacy or vulnerability, emotional immaturity, growing up in an environment where emotions were minimized or ignored. In emotionally neglectful relationships, your partner may care deeply, but doesn't know how to show it. He may freeze when you express sadness, shut down during conflict, or struggle to articulate his feelings. He might avoid hard conversations, not because he doesn't care, but because he doesn't know how to engage without feeling overwhelmed or inadequate. The pain is real, but the root issue isn't necessarily selfishness, it's emotional incapacity. What separates neglect from selfishness is how your partner responds once the issue is brought to light. What is emotional selfishness? Emotional selfishness, on the other hand, is not about what your partner doesn't know. It's about what he chooses not to care about. It's a pattern of prioritizing his comfort over your emotional needs, shutting down conversations that don't serve him, expecting support, empathy, and flexibility, while rarely offering the same in return, responding to your feelings with defensiveness, annoyance, or dismissal, making you feel guilty, dramatic, or needy for simply having emotions. In other words, he knows what you need, and he consistently chooses not to offer it because it's inconvenient for him. Where emotional neglect is passive, emotional selfishness is patterned and self-protective. It stems not from inability, but from unwillingness. How do you tell the difference in real time? Ask yourself the following. 1. When I express how I feel, does he listen or get defensive? A neglectful partner may struggle, but a selfish one will often turn the conversation around to make you feel at fault. 2. Does he ever take initiative to understand or meet my emotional needs? Emotional selfishness often expects you to carry the emotional labor of both people. Neglect, though painful, may still show signs of effort. 3. Has he ever acknowledged my pain without minimizing it? If every emotional need you express is dismissed as too sensitive or not a big deal, it's a sign your partner centers himself more than the relationship. 4. Does he only show up when it benefits him? Selfish partners may seem present when they want something, sex, validation, admiration, but disappear when you need emotional support. Why this distinction matters. If your partner is emotionally neglectful, there may be hope for healing through communication, couples therapy, and emotional skill building. But if the issue is emotional selfishness, you need to ask a harder question. Am I in a relationship with someone who genuinely lacks the capacity to love me the way I deserve, or someone who simply refuses to? That answer changes everything. Because while emotional neglect can sometimes be unlearned, emotional selfishness is often deeply rooted in ego, entitlement, and avoidance of responsibility. You can't fix that for him. And it's not your job to shrink your needs just to maintain his comfort. Final thought: don't confuse silence for innocence. Many emotionally selfish partners don't yell, cheat, or leave. They stay silent. They avoid. They make you question your own needs rather than reflect on their lack of effort. Their weapon isn't abuse, it's absence. But absence can hurt just as deeply. You deserve to be emotionally met, not just cohabitating with someone who uses your love for their convenience. So ask yourself again, not with judgment, but with compassion. Is this distance because he doesn't know how to love, or because he doesn't care enough to try? That difference is the line between reparable neglect and relational betrayal. Why you might ignore the signs. It's not uncommon for people, especially women or emotionally attuned partners, to minimize or rationalize these patterns. He had a tough childhood. He's just bad at expressing feelings. Maybe I am expecting too much. At least he's not cheating. These thoughts are understandable, but dangerous. They protect you from immediate emotional pain, but keep you in a cycle of unmet needs. The longer you stay silent, the deeper the loneliness grows, until you begin to lose connection with yourself. The psychological cost of emotional selfishness. Emotional selfishness doesn't always arrive with bruises or shouting. Often, it slips in quietly, wrapped in normalcy, disguised as just how he is, and justified by your love for him. Over time, however, this one-sided dynamic erodes something much deeper than patience. It slowly dismantles your sense of emotional safety, self-worth, and even your identity. Living with an emotionally selfish partner can feel like a war with no visible battlefield, just a constant, invisible tension between your needs and his unwillingness to honor them. The damage builds slowly, and because there's no dramatic blow-up, it often goes unnoticed until you barely recognize yourself. Let's explore the hidden costs in more detail. 1. Erosion of self-worth. When your emotional needs are repeatedly ignored, dismissed, or ridiculed, you start to internalize a dangerous message. Maybe what I feel isn't important. At first, you may try harder, communicating your feelings, explaining your hurt, asking for more connection. But when those efforts are met with indifference or irritation, you begin to shrink. You lower the volume on your own voice. You stop asking. You start apologizing for needing anything at all. Eventually, you may no longer trust that you even deserve to be emotionally nurtured. You become convinced that your needs are too big, too demanding, or simply wrong. This is not love. This is slow erasure. 2. Chronic self-doubt and confusion. Emotionally selfish partners often twist reality subtly. When you express a need or emotion, they may dismiss it as overreacting, shift blame back onto you, accuse you of being too sensitive, change the subject to avoid discomfort. Over time, this creates a state of self-gaslighting where you no longer trust your own perceptions. You question whether you're the problem. You wonder if you're imagining things. You second-guess your instincts, even when your gut is screaming. This confusion doesn't just make you feel unstable, it keeps you emotionally dependent on their version of the truth. It disorients you into silence. 3. Emotional starvation. Everyone has a basic human need to feel seen, heard, valued, and loved. When you're emotionally paired with someone who prioritizes his needs while ignoring yours, you begin to experience emotional starvation. You may find yourself a longing for conversations that don't happen, craving validation that never arrives, offering love in hopes that it might be reciprocated, withholding your own emotions because you know they won't be held. This emotional emptiness leads to deep fatigue, not just of the body, but of the soul. You go through the motions. You smile in public, but inside you feel hollow. Not because you don't have love to give, but because it's never reflected back. 4. Heightened anxiety and hypervigilance. In emotionally selfish dynamics, the relationship lacks consistency and safety. Your partner may act warm and affectionate when it benefits him, and cold or unavailable when you need him most. This unpredictability breeds relational anxiety. You may find yourself constantly overthinking your words, monitoring his mood, trying to earn his attention or affection, avoiding conflict at all costs, bracing yourself for withdrawal or dismissal. This state of hyperalertness isn't sustainable. It wears down your nervous system and makes emotional rest impossible. 5. Suppressed anger and resentment. When you're constantly prioritizing someone else's comfort over your own pain, suppressed emotions start to build. You may try to stay calm, understanding, or mature, but beneath the surface, resentment simmers. Over time, this unexpressed frustration can manifest as sarcasm, passive-aggressive comments, emotional shutdown, explosive reactions over seemingly small issues. You may begin to feel angry not only at him, but at yourself, for staying, for tolerating, for forgetting how to ask for more. This inner tension can make you feel like you're the problem, when in truth, your anger is a signal that your boundaries have been violated over and over again. 6. Emotional isolation and loneliness. Perhaps the cruelest cost of emotional selfishness is the loneliness it breeds, not just from your partner, but from the world. You may feel embarrassed to talk about your relationship, ashamed to admit how unfulfilled you feel, worried that others won't understand, afraid of being judged for complaining when things look fine from the outside. As a result, you retreat. You stop opening up. You stop reaching out. You exist in a bubble of isolation, physically partnered, but emotionally abandoned. And the longer you stay in that space, the harder it becomes to remember that connection is supposed to feel mutual. 7. Loss of identity. When your emotional reality is constantly dismissed and your efforts to repair the relationship are ignored, you begin to adapt by changing who you are. You may notice you speak less. You stop pursuing your own dreams. You avoid asking for things. You downplay your personality. You focus all your energy on keeping the peace. Over time, you may no longer recognize the person you've become. You were once expressive, open, vibrant. Now you're quiet, cautious, and tired. This transformation isn't random. It's self-protection. But it comes at the cost of authenticity, joy, and emotional vitality. Final thought. Emotional selfishness is a slow disappearance. It doesn't happen in a day. It happens when you speak, and he doesn't hear. When you reach, and he doesn't reach back. When you hurt, and he walks away again. It happens every time your feelings are called dramatic, your needs are labeled as complaints, or your pain is met with silence. The psychological cost of emotional selfishness is not just loneliness. It's the slow loss of your voice, your trust in yourself, and your belief that love should feel like mutuality, not survival. But here's the most important truth. You can begin to heal the moment you stop justifying what hurts. Is he capable of change? That depends. One of the hardest questions to ask and answer when you're in a relationship with an emotionally selfish partner is this. Can he change? It's a question loaded with hope, fear, loyalty, and longing. Because despite the hurt, despite the loneliness, many people stay in these relationships not because they're blind to the pain, but because they see the potential. You might remember the version of him who was affectionate, present, maybe even tender in the beginning. Or you might see glimmers of emotional intelligence, brief moments where he'd just show up, listen, or try. These flickers of hope can make you believe that maybe all he needs is time, love, or the right kind of support. But here's the difficult truth. Potential is not the same as willingness. And love, no matter how deep, cannot change someone who doesn't want to be changed. What real change actually requires. If your partner is emotionally selfish, the first thing to understand is that change, real, sustained, soul-level change, requires more than a temporary improvement or a few kind words after a fight. It requires 1. Self-awareness, the ability to see and admit one's own role in the dynamic. 2. Accountability, a willingness to own the harm caused without excuses or deflection. 3. Empathy, a genuine desire to understand how their behavior impacts you emotionally. 4. Effort, not just reactive promises, but consistent actions over time. 5. Emotional regulation, the capacity to stay engaged even when uncomfortable. 6. Therapeutic support. For many, outside help is essential to dismantle deeply ingrained behaviors. Change is not about knowing you're hurting someone, it's about caring enough to stop. So, is he capable? Ask these questions. These questions may be difficult, but they are necessary. Be radically honest, not about what you hope he'll become, but about who he has consistently shown himself to be. 1. Does he ever genuinely listen when I express pain, or does he deflect and defend? If every vulnerable moment turns into a debate, denial, or reversal, you're the one overreacting. He is more committed to protecting his ego than understanding your heart. 2. Has he ever taken accountability without being cornered or forced into it? Genuine change requires ownership. If he only apologizes to end the conversation or avoid consequences, those apologies are not rooted in true growth. 3. Does he show curiosity about my emotional experience or treat it as a nuisance? If he shuts down every time things get emotionally real or gets irritated when you need support, this suggests a lack of interest in mutual emotional partnership. For when he says he'll change, does anything actually shift and stay that way? Emotional selfishness isn't changed by words. It's changed by a shift in behavior over weeks, months, and years. A pattern of better for a few days, then back to normal is not change. It's appeasement. 5. Is he willing to do uncomfortable emotional work, like therapy or self-reflection? True growth is uncomfortable. It forces a person to confront their shadows, ego, and past wounds. If he refuses to do this work, you will be forced to carry the emotional weight of both people again. If the answer is no to most of these, then what? Then you're likely in a relationship with someone who is not just emotionally selfish, but emotionally unwilling to change. That doesn't make you weak. That doesn't mean you didn't try hard enough. It simply means that love alone cannot carry a relationship that one person refuses to meet halfway. No matter how much compassion you have, no matter how many conversations you initiate, no matter how much of yourself you give, it will never be enough for someone who is deeply committed to staying the same. Hope versus fantasy. Learning to tell the difference. Hope says, change is possible if he chooses to show up and do the work. Fantasy says, change will happen if I love him enough, stay long enough, or sacrifice more of myself. If your hope for change is built only on your effort, not his, it may be time to ask whether you are waiting for someone who has already shown you who they are. And as painful as it is, letting go of that fantasy is often the first step toward your emotional freedom. Final reflection. He can change, but that doesn't mean he will. Yes, people are capable of change, but capability is not commitment. Willingness cannot be forced. And transformation doesn't come from pressure, it comes from desire. So instead of asking, can he change? Ask yourself, is he showing me, with his actions, that he's ready to grow? Am I sacrificing myself while he protects his comfort? What do I lose if I keep waiting for someone to become who I wish they were? Your time, your heart, your spirit, they are worthy of reciprocity, of courage, of effort, of someone who not only hears your voice, but honors it with action. And if he can't do that, then the change that matters most may be your own. What you can do next. 1. Name what you're feeling out loud. Stop minimizing it. Name the loneliness. Name the emotional gap. Say the words, I feel emotionally alone with you. Let that truth be heard. First by you, then by him. 2. Reclaim your needs without shame. Your emotional needs are not too much. They are human. You deserve to be seen, heard, and emotionally partnered, not just physically present with someone. 3. Observe his response without excuse. Watch how he responds, not just in the moment, but in the days that follow. Does he follow through? Or does he wait for things to blow over? Real change is consistent, not performative. 4. Get support from the outside. Speak to a therapist, a trusted friend, or a support group. Isolation keeps you stuck. Validation helps you move forward. 5. Consider your emotional future. If nothing changes, ask yourself, am I willing to stay in a relationship where I feel alone more than I feel loved? That answer doesn't need to come quickly, but it needs to come from your deepest truth, not your fear. It's not supposed to feel this lonely. Being in a relationship should never feel lonelier than being alone. If you constantly feel like you're fighting to matter, to be heard, or to be emotionally included, something is fundamentally wrong. Love is not supposed to be a performance where one person shines while the other disappears backstage. And if the man you're with shows no curiosity, no effort, and no accountability for how you feel, then yes, it might not just be a relationship issue. It might be that he is simply selfish. But your emotional starvation doesn't have to be permanent. There is love that listens, love that shares, love that does not make you beg. The first step toward that kind of love is believing that you deserve it. Cultivating presence, the essence of conscious love. Presence is not just about being physically with someone. It means being emotionally available, mentally open, and spiritually grounded in each moment of connection. It means a listening without trying to fix, accepting without trying to change, a loving without expecting to be saved. When presence replaces possession, the relationship becomes a living, breathing space of mutual evolution. Each person can grow individually and together, without being trapped by the other's insecurities or demands. Signs that love has moved from possession to presence. You love someone without needing to control their choices. You feel fulfilled with or without constant contact. You support their growth, even if it challenges your comfort. You feel calm in love, not just excited or anxious. You're able to love again, not from emptiness, but from overflow. The paradox of letting go. One of the deepest truths about love is this. The more we release our grip on it, the more freely it flows. Possession creates tension, resistance, and fear. Presence creates space, trust, and truth. Letting go doesn't mean not caring. It means allowing love to be what it truly is, a shared experience, not a captured one. And healing means understanding that love, to be real and resilient, must include both freedom and intimacy, not one at the cost of the other. Final thought. Healing from ego-driven love doesn't mean rejecting love altogether. It means reclaiming it, stripped of fantasy, free from fear, rooted in awareness. When we learn to love with presence instead of possession, we discover that the most profound relationships are not those that fill our emptiness, but those that amplify our wholeness. 8. Conclusion. Loving without losing the self. In the end, the heart of this exploration lies in one painful yet liberating truth. The deepest suffering in love often comes not from loving too much, but from losing ourselves in the process. Romantic love is one of the most powerful emotional experiences a human can have. It awakens vulnerability, exposes hidden wounds, and touches the ego like few other things can. But when love becomes entangled with identity, when our sense of worth is defined by someone else's presence or affection, we begin to fragment. We shape-shift, self-abandon, overgive, or possess, not because we are inherently selfish, but because we are afraid. Afraid to lose love, and in losing love, lose ourselves. But the real tragedy is this. We often lose ourselves long before the relationship ends. The path back to self in love. To love without losing the self is not to love less. It is to love from a place of wholeness rather than need. It means no longer molding ourselves into the ideal partner out of fear of rejection. No longer tying our emotional stability to someone else's moods, behaviors, or decisions. No longer seeking to earn love through sacrifice or suppression. Instead, we begin to show up as we are, with needs, with truth, with strength and softness. And we begin to love others as they are, not as characters in our fantasy or extensions of our self-worth. This is where true intimacy begins, not in merging into one, but in standing side by side as two whole people, sharing space without surrendering self. Ego as the silent saboteur and the potential ally. Throughout the journey of love, the ego often lurks quietly in the background, whispering stories of scarcity, fear, entitlement, and expectation. If they love me, I must be good enough. If they leave, it means I'm unlovable. If they love someone else, I must not matter anymore. But ego isn't evil. It's just wounded and afraid. When recognized and gently regulated, the ego becomes a messenger, revealing where we still need healing, where our worth is outsourced, where we are asking others to fulfill roles we haven't claimed for ourselves. In this way, love becomes a mirror. And, if we are willing, it becomes a classroom for emotional evolution. What loving without losing the self looks like. You communicate honestly, even when it's uncomfortable. You set boundaries without guilt and respect the boundaries of others. You allow people to choose you freely, not through fear or obligation. You recognize that your value remains, even if the relationship doesn't. This kind of love is not only more sustainable, it's more transformative. It's not rooted in control, insecurity, or idealization. It's built on presence, mutual growth, and authenticity. Why this matters? Because too many people believe that to love deeply, they must suffer deeply. That true love demands self-sacrifice, obsession, or the loss of autonomy. But love that requires you to disappear to be loved is not love, it's dependency. Loving without losing the self is an act of courage. It means staying rooted while reaching out. It means embracing the other without abandoning yourself. And it means trusting that love, when it's real, will never ask you to shrink to fit inside it. Final reflection. The people who love the most often hurt the most, not because love is flawed, but because their love was wrapped in layers of unmet needs, ego longings, and self-forgetting. But healing is possible. And through that healing, a new kind of love can emerge, one where the self is not lost, but revealed. To love well, we do not need to give up who we are. We only need to remember it, especially in love.